Montana Territory, 1873. The vast expanse of untamed frontier stretched before Quinn O'Malley like a canvas of possibilities, but also of solitude. At 25, he had already learned the harsh lesson that the West gave nothing freely and took everything it could. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling grasslands of Paradise Valley as he rode fence line on his small but growing cattle spread. Man wasn't made to share his life out here, Quinn muttered to his bay gelding, Copper. Just survival, hard work, and if you're lucky, a piece of land to call your own before the ground claims you. Quinn had grown into his handsome features early, with eyes the color of prairie sky and a strong jawline often covered with light stubble from long days working. His broad shoulders spoke of years throwing hay bales and breaking horses. Women in nearby Livingston took notice when he came to town, but Quinn kept his distance. His parents' bitter marriage before consumption took them both had taught him that love was a liability in a land where death rode alongside every settler. The war had only hardened that belief. 3 years in the Union cavalry had shown Quinn exactly how fragile life could be, how quickly companions turned to corpses. When he mustered out in '66, he took his pay and headed west, determined to build something lasting in a place where a man answered only to himself and the elements. Sentiment is just another word for weakness, he told Copper, patting the horse's neck as they crested a ridge overlooking his modest cabin and small herd. And weakness gets you dead out here. What Quinn O'Malley didn't know, couldn't yet understand, was that the very isolation he embraced was slowly hollowing him from within. The cattle and horses didn't fill the silence of evenings by the fire. The land gave sustenance but not companionship. What he truly needed, though he'd deny it fiercely, was human connection that made the struggle worthwhile. That understanding would come to him on an ordinary Tuesday in July, when the Livingston stagecoach brought trouble, opportunity, and a pair of amber eyes that would haunt his dreams for months to come. The stagecoach wasn't due to pass through Paradise Valley that summer day. Its normal route ran 20 miles east, but a washout on Bozeman Pass had forced a detour. Quinn was riding back from checking on a missing calf when he heard the unmistakable rumble and the sharp crack of a whip. Then came the sound that changed everything: gunfire. Without hesitation, Quinn spurred Copper toward the commotion. As they cleared a stand of cottonwoods, he saw the stage tilted precariously on the edge of the road, one wheel broken. 3 riders circled it, bandanas pulled high, pistols drawn. The driver slumped over the box, motionless. Quinn drew his Winchester from its scabbard and chambered around. "This is no business of yours," he reminded himself, even as he urged Copper forward. But something, duty, decency, or simply the code of the West, wouldn't let him ride away. He fired a warning shot that sent dirt spraying near the lead outlaw's horse. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. "That's far enough," Quinn called out, leveling his rifle. "Next one's not going to miss." What happened next unfolded with the chaotic speed of all violence. 2 of the bandits wheeled and opened fire. Quinn dropped from his saddle, using Copper's bulk as cover while he returned fire. One outlaw fell, clutching his shoulder. The second's horse bolted when a bullet whizzed too close. The third, seeing his advantage evaporating, spurred his mount and disappeared over the ridge, his companions scrambling to follow. Only when the dust settled did Quinn approach the stagecoach cautiously. The driver was dead, shot clean through, but movement from inside the coach caught his attention. "Is it safe to come out?" a woman's voice, steady despite the circumstances. "Yes, ma'am." "They're gone now." Quinn holstered his pistol and moved to open the coach door. What emerged first was a honey-colored traveling hat, then a pair of clear amber eyes set in a heart-shaped face. Framed by dark chestnut hair pulled back in a practical but becoming style, those eyes assessed Quinn with surprising composure for someone who just survived an attack. "Faith Valentin," she said, extending a gloved hand. "And I believe I owe you my thanks, Mr. O'Malley, Quinn O'Malley." He removed his hat, suddenly aware of the dust and sweat that covered him after a long day's work. At 22 years old, Faith Valentin carried herself with a poise that suggested Eastern education, but her grip was firm, not the delicate touch of a city woman. As she stepped fully from the coach, Quinn noticed the practical cut of her traveling dress, navy blue wool, simply tailored but of good quality. No excessive frills or impractical bustles, just a woman dressed for the journey ahead rather than to impress. What struck him most wasn't her obvious beauty, though that was undeniable, but the absence of panic in her demeanor. "The driver?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Dead, ma'am." "I'm sorry." Faith Valentin nodded, grief flickering across her features before that remarkable composure returned. There were two other passengers, a salesman bound for Helena and an elderly gentleman. Quinn peered into the coach. The salesman was huddled on the floor, white-faced but unhurt. The older man hadn't been so fortunate. Blood stained his shirt where a stray bullet had found him, though he was conscious and attempting to stem the bleeding with a handkerchief. "We need to get him help," Quinn said. "My place is closest, about 3 miles. Can you ride?" Faith nodded. "Since I was 6, my father insisted." Within minutes, Quinn had transferred the wounded man to Copper's back, supporting him in the saddle while Faith gathered what belongings she could carry. The salesman, introducing himself as Thomas Perkins, helped secure the stage and promised to remain with the driver's body until they could return with proper transportation. As they started the slow journey to Quinn's homestead, he found himself strangely aware of the woman walking beside him. She kept pace without complaint, occasionally asking practical questions about the distance or the wounded man's condition. Not once did she bemoan her circumstances or the dust soiling her hem. "You're not what I expected from an Eastern woman," Quinn said finally. Faith's mouth curved slightly. "And what did you expect, Mr. O'Malley? Vapors?" "Hysterics." "Something like that," he admitted. "My father was a doctor in Boston. I assisted him from the time I could reach his instruments," she explained. "Blood doesn't frighten me, nor does necessity." "What brings you to Montana territory then?" "Not much call for doctors' daughters out here." Something shuddered in those amber eyes. "My father passed last winter. I'm going to live with my aunt in Helena. She runs a millinery shop and needs assistance." Quinn nodded, hearing what she didn't say, that circumstances, not choice, had driven her west. Like so many others, Faith Valentin was starting over in a land that specialized in second chances and sudden endings. By the time they reached Quinn's cabin, the wounded passenger, who'd introduced himself as Walter Jenkins, a retired banker from St. Louis, was weak from blood loss. Faith immediately took charge, directing Quinn to boil water while she examined the wound. "The bullet passed through, which is fortunate," she said, her fingers probing gently. "But he's lost a lot of blood, and there's risk of fever." Quinn watched in amazement as she cleaned and dressed the wound with supplies from his meager medicine chest, supplemented by items from her own traveling bag. Her movements were efficient, her instructions clear. This was no sheltered Eastern flower, but a woman with practical skills and a steady hand. That night, as Jenkins rested on Quinn's bed and Faith dozed in the cabin's single chair, Quinn found himself staring at the ceiling from his bedroll on the floor, troubled by unfamiliar thoughts. Something about Faith Valentin's competence and calm dignity had wormed its way past his defenses. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was considerable, but the strength beneath it. She'd faced death today without flinching, had walked miles without complaint, had tended a wounded stranger with skilled hands. "Don't be a fool," he whispered to himself in the darkness. "She'll be gone to Helena as soon as Jenkins can travel. Women like that don't stay in places like this." But the thought brought an unexpected hollow feeling to his chest. Morning came with pale light filtering through Quinn's single window. He woke to find Faith already up, tending to Jenkins and somehow managing to look composed despite spending the night in a chair. She'd loosened her hair to rebraid it, and the chestnut locks caught the sunlight in ways that made Quinn look away, uncomfortable with his own notice. "I need to ride to town," he said after checking on Jenkins. "Get the sheriff about the attack. Arrange for transport for the stage driver's body and your fellow passengers." Faith nodded. "I'll tend to Mr. Jenkins while you're gone, and Mr. O'Malley," she hesitated. "Thank you for your hospitality. Not everyone would take in strangers this way." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied gruffly, unused to gratitude. Her slight smile suggested she knew better. No, Mr. O'Malley. They would not. The ride to Livingston gave Quinn time to think, too much time, perhaps. Faith Valentin was a complication he hadn't anticipated and couldn't afford. Once he delivered her safely to Helena, that would be the end of it. Back to the solitary life he'd chosen, the independence he valued above all else. Yet something about her kept returning to his thoughts, not just the amber eyes or the graceful way she moved, but the competence in her hands as she tended Jenkins, the quiet resilience in her bearing. She was beautiful, yes, but it was something deeper that unsettled him. Sheriff Dawson received the news of the stage robbery grimly. "Third one this month," he said, reaching for his hat. "Sounds like the Coulter gang. They've been working the stage route since spring." He eyed Quinn closely. "Lucky for that lady you were riding fence line when you were." Lucky, Quinn agreed, though it hadn't felt like luck, more like an interruption to his carefully ordered existence. When they returned to Quinn's cabin with a wagon for Jenkins and arrangements to collect the stage driver's body, Faith had not only tended the wounded man, but had somehow managed to prepare a meal from Quinn's sparse supplies. "Jenkins is better," she reported. "The wound is clean and his fever hasn't worsened." Sheriff Dawson removed his hat in Faith's presence, clearly impressed. "Ma'am, that's mighty fine nursing. You have experience in such matters." "My father was a physician," she replied simply. The sheriff nodded appreciatively. "We could use someone with your skills in Livingston. Our doctor's getting on in years and his hands aren't as steady as they once were." Quinn saw something flicker in Faith's expression, interest, quickly masked by practicality. "I'm afraid I'm bound for Helena, Sheriff. My aunt is expecting me." "Shame," Dawson said. "Well, once we get Jenkins settled in town, we'll see about getting you on the next stage north." Faith thanked him, but Quinn noticed her glance around his cabin with something like reluctance. Had she found something agreeable in this rough place? The thought was preposterous. A woman of her background belonged in a proper town, not on a struggling cattle spread with a man who barely remembered how to make conversation. After Jenkins and the sheriff departed with promises to send word about the next northbound stage, Quinn found himself alone with Faith for the first time since their initial meeting. An awkward silence stretched between them. "I should see to the stock," he said finally. "May I join you?" Faith asked, surprising him. "I've been cooped up inside all day and I'd like to see your ranch." Ranch was a generous term for his modest holding, but Quinn nodded. As they walked to the barn, he found himself seeing his property through her eyes. The cabin he'd built with his own hands, the small but sturdy barn, the corral where 3 half-broken Mustangs watched their approach warily. "It's not much," he said defensively. "It's a beginning," Faith replied. "And beginnings are precious things, Mr. O'Malley." Something in her tone made him glance at her. "Quinn," he said. "Just Quinn is fine." She smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her amber eyes and transformed her face from merely beautiful to something that made his chest tighten strangely. "Quinn, then." "And I'm Faith." They fell into an unexpected rhythm over the next 3 days while waiting for word about the stage. Faith proved surprisingly capable around the ranch, gathering eggs from the small henhouse, helping with the garden Quinn had started that spring, and even assisting with the evening milking of his single dairy cow. "Where did you learn to milk?" he asked, watching her hands work with practiced efficiency. "My mother's people had a farm in Vermont," she explained. "We summered there when I was a girl." A shadow crossed her face. "Before she passed." Quinn recognized the look of old grief. "How old were you?" 12. Father never remarried. It was just the 2 of us after that." Her hands never stopped their rhythmic work. "And now it's just me." The simple statement contained volumes of loneliness that resonated with Quinn's own solitary existence. For the first time, he wondered if his chosen isolation was wisdom or fear disguised as independence. On the 3rd evening, as they sat on Quinn's narrow porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Faith broke their comfortable silence. "Why cattle ranching? You strike me as a man who could have chosen many paths." Quinn considered the question, No one had asked about his choices in years. Land, he said finally. After the war, I wanted something solid under my feet. Something that couldn't be taken away except by nature itself. He glanced at her profile, gilded by the fading light. What about you? A doctor's daughter turned milliner doesn't seem an obvious path. Faith's fingers worried at a loose thread on her sleeve. There weren't many options after father died. His practice sustained us, but he left little behind. My aunt's offer was timely. But not what you wanted, Quinn guessed. Her smile held resignation. Women have fewer choices than men, Quinn. We take the opportunities that present themselves and make the best of them. And if you could choose anything, if there were no limitations. Faith turned to face him fully, those amber eyes searching his face as if weighing whether to trust him with the truth. I'd have studied medicine properly. Father taught me much, but without formal training. She shrugged, leaving the impossibility unspoken. Female doctors existed, but were rare and often unwelcome. Quinn could see the passion in her eyes when she spoke of medicine, the same fire he felt when working his land. "You'd make a fine doctor," he said quietly. "Thank you for that." Her voice was soft in the gathering dusk. "Few would say so." They sat in companionable silence until the first stars appeared. Quinn found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the faint scent of lavender water, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the way the evening breeze played with tendrils of hair that had escaped her practical style. It was a dangerous awareness, one that had no place in his carefully constructed life. Yet when Sheriff Dawson rode up the next morning with news that the northbound stage would depart in 2 days, Quinn felt an unexpected hollowness in his chest. "That's welcome news," Faith said, though her smile seemed forced. "I've imposed on Mr. O'Malley's hospitality long enough." "No imposition," Quinn heard himself say. "It's been helpful having an extra pair of hands around the place." Sheriff Dawson glanced between them with knowing eyes. "Well, I'll leave you to your preparations, Miss Valentin." "Quinn," he tipped his hat. "By the way, we caught one of those stage robbers, the wounded one. He's singing like a canary about the others. Seems they're holed up near Eagle Creek. I'm putting together a posse tomorrow if you're interested, Quinn." Quinn nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell between him and Faith. "I should thank you," she said finally. "You've shown me great kindness." "Anyone would have done the same," Quinn replied automatically. Faith shook her head. "There you go again, diminishing your own decency. It's rather maddening, you know." The directness of her observation startled a laugh from him. "I've been called many things, Miss Valentin, but maddening is a new one." "Faith," she corrected, her amber eyes warming. "I thought we'd established that." The day before Faith's departure dawned with ominous clouds gathering over the mountains. Quinn rode out early to check on a section of fence that had been giving trouble, trying to outpace both the impending storm and his own unsettled thoughts. Faith Valentin would leave tomorrow, continuing to Helena and her aunt's shop. That was as it should be. She belonged in town, among people, using her quick mind and capable hands for more than ranch work. His life would return to its familiar rhythm, solitary, focused, uncomplicated by amber eyes and unexpected laughter. So why did the thought sit like a stone in his chest? The first fat raindrops began to fall as Quinn turned copper toward home. By the time he reached the cabin, the storm had unleashed its full fury. He stabled the gelding quickly, then ran for the porch, soaked to the skin despite his oilskin coat. Faith met him at the door with a towel and concern etched on her features. "I was beginning to worry. This storm came up so suddenly." "Been watching it build all morning," Quinn said, removing his dripping hat. "Should blow through by nightfall." As he spoke, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the cabin, followed by a splintering sound and a crash that could only be a tree falling. Faith startled, stepping closer to Quinn automatically. He found his hand steadying her elbow, the contact sending a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the lightning. "That was close," she said, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. Quinn nodded, acutely aware that he hadn't released her arm, that she hadn't stepped away. They stood frozen in the moment, the storm raging outside while something equally powerful and unpredictable built in the space between them. Faith looked up, those amber eyes meeting his directly. "Quinn," she began, then stopped, uncertainty flitting across her features. The next crash of thunder broke the spell. Quinn stepped back, releasing her arm. "I should change before I catch my death," he said gruffly, retreating to the small alcove where he kept his spare clothing. That evening, confined to the cabin by the continuing storm, they sat before the fire with mugs of coffee, the silence between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Quinn found himself studying Faith's profile in the firelight, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her lashes cast shadows, the small scar near her temple that he'd never noticed before. "How did you get that?" he asked, nodding toward the mark when she turned to him questioningly. Faith's fingers rose to touch the scar, a small smile playing at her lips. "Childhood misadventure. I climbed a tree to rescue a neighbor's cat and fell. Father had to put in 3 stitches. Her eyes grew distant with memory. "He said I'd make a terrible patient but an excellent doctor because I didn't cry once." "You're leaving tomorrow," Quinn said abruptly. Faith nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes." "What will you do in Helena, besides help your aunt?" She considered the question, staring into the fire. "Survive, I suppose, make myself useful. Perhaps find a way to continue learning medicine, even if only through books." "Is that enough, just surviving?" Her eyes met his, startlingly direct. "Is it enough for you, Quinn O'Malley? This solitary existence you've carved out?" The question struck him like a physical blow. For years he'd convinced himself that independence was all he needed, land under his feet, stock that was his own, and the freedom to answer to no one. Yet in just a few days, Faith Valentin had revealed the emptiness at the center of that life with one simple question. "It was," he said finally, "until now." The words hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Faith's eyes widened slightly, a flush rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. "Quinn," she began, but whatever she might have said was cut off by a tremendous crash outside, followed by the panicked whinnying of horses. Quinn was on his feet immediately, reaching for his coat. Something spooked the stock. Faith rose too, already moving toward her shawl. "I'll come with you." "No, stay here where it's safe." "I'll check it out." But Faith was already wrapping the shawl around her shoulders. 2 sets of hands will be better than one if something's happened to the horses. Quinn knew better than to argue with the determination in those amber eyes. Together they braved the rain, rushing toward the barn where the horses' distress was growing more frantic by the moment. The source of the commotion became immediately apparent. A massive pine had fallen across the corral fence, smashing a section flat and spooking the 3 half-broken Mustangs Quinn had been training. One had already escaped through the gap and was disappearing into the storm-dark forest. The other 2 were circling in panic, dangerously close to injuring themselves on the splintered wood. "The gate," Quinn shouted above the storm. "We need to open it so they can get out safely, rather than through that break." Faith nodded, already moving toward the corral gate while Quinn approached the frightened animals with hands outstretched, speaking in low, soothing tones that barely carried above the rain. One Mustang, a black mare with a white blaze, seemed to calm at his voice, but the other, a skittish bay gelding, continued to circle in terror. Quinn saw the danger an instant before it happened. The gelding, blind with panic, charged directly toward Faith as she struggled with the gate's wet latch. Quinn shouted a warning, but the storm swallowed his voice. What happened next would remain etched in Quinn's memory forever. Instead of freezing or running, either of which might have triggered the horse's predatory instinct, Faith stood her ground. As the gelding bore down on her, she raised her arms slowly and began to speak in a tone Quinn couldn't hear but could see in the calm set of her shoulders, the gentle motion of her hands. The gelding checked its charge, nostrils flaring, sides heaving. For one breathless moment, horse and woman regarded each other through sheets of rain. Then, impossibly, the animal lowered its head and allowed Faith to stroke its nose. With her free hand, she finally worked the gate latch free. Quinn approached cautiously, leading the black mare. Together, they guided both animals out of the broken corral and into the barn where they could be safely confined until the storm passed and repairs could be made. Once inside the relative quiet of the barn, Quinn turned to Faith, who was wringing water from her skirts, seemingly unaware of the extraordinary thing she'd just done. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," he said, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Faith looked up, rainwater glistening on her face like tears. "Father kept horses. I learned young that they respond to our fear more than our words. You could have been killed. So could you, rushing out in this storm." Her chin lifted slightly. "I don't need protecting, Quinn." "No," he agreed softly. "You don't." They stood there, drenched and breathing hard, the horses shifting restlessly in their stalls. Faith's hair had come loose from its pins, falling in dark, wet waves around her face. Droplets clung to her eyelashes, catching the lantern light. Quinn had never seen anything so beautiful or so fierce in all his days. Without conscious decision, he stepped closer. Faith didn't retreat. Another step and he could feel the warmth radiating from her despite her soaked clothing. Her eyes, those remarkable amber eyes, held his without wavering. "Faith," he said, her name a question and an answer all at once. "Yes," she replied to the unspoken. His hands, rough from years of ranch work, framed her face with unexpected gentleness. Her skin was cool from the rain but soft beneath his calloused fingers. For a heartbeat he hesitated, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Faith Valentin rose slightly on her toes and closed the final distance between them. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked and answered in the press of lips. Then something shifted, a dam breaking inside Quinn that he hadn't known existed. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as her hands found purchase on his shoulders. The kiss deepened, speaking of loneliness recognized and solitude rejected. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. Rain drummed on the barn roof, but the sound seemed distant compared to the thundering of his heart. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said again, the words carrying a different weight now. Faith's hands tightened on his shoulders. "Yes. I don't want you to go." The admission cost him something, pride perhaps, or the illusion of self-sufficiency he'd maintained for so long. "Ask me to stay then," Faith whispered, challenge and vulnerability mingling in her voice. Quinn pulled back slightly to see her face clearly. "You have plans. Your aunt is expecting you." "Plans can change." "But I won't stay where I'm not truly wanted, Quinn O'Malley. Not even for—" she gestured between them, leaving the word unspoken. Quinn understood then what she needed from him, not just desire which burned bright between them but recognition of something deeper. "A future rather than a moment. I've spent 6 years convincing myself that all I need is this land and my own 2 hands," he said slowly. "It took 3 days with you to realize how wrong I've been." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "Stay, Faith, not just for now. Stay and see what we might build together." The smile that illuminated her face then was worth every moment of vulnerability the words had cost him. "Yes," she said simply. "I will." They returned to the cabin hand in hand, the storm outside forgotten in the shelter they'd found in each other. Morning brought clearing skies and the realization that decisions made in storm-swept barns must now face the light of day. Faith sat at Quinn's small table, watching him prepare coffee with movements made familiar over their brief time together. "I should write to my aunt," she said. "Explain the change in plans." Quinn nodded, trying to suppress the flutter of uncertainty in his chest. Would daylight bring regret? The stage still comes through today. You could take more time to decide. "Go to Helena as planned, get settled, see if—" he trailed off. Faith rose and came to stand beside him. "Are you having second thoughts, Quinn O'Malley?" He turned to face her fully. "No, but I want you to be certain. This is a hard life, especially for a woman accustomed to city comforts. I have little to offer besides these hands and this land." "Those hands and this land are precisely what I want," Faith said, taking his rough palms in her smaller ones. "Along with the man who values them so highly." Her expression grew serious. "But I need you to understand something. I won't abandon medicine. Somehow I will find a way to continue my father's work." Quinn considered this, understanding that it was both declaration and question. Would he support such an unconventional path for a woman who would be his wife? Livingston needs a doctor, he said finally. Sheriff Dawson said as much. Perhaps not tomorrow, but someday when you've had time to establish yourself, to learn what you still need to know. The hope that bloomed in Faith's eyes was answer enough. She embraced him fiercely, her face pressed against his chest. Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me. They were interrupted by the sound of approaching hooves. Quinn tensed automatically, reaching for the rifle that hung by the door, but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Dawson's distinctive bay gelding. Faith stepped back, smoothing her skirts as Quinn opened the door to greet their visitor. The sheriff dismounted stiffly, his expression grim. "Quinn, Miss Valentin," he removed his hat. "I bring news and I'm afraid it's not good. The stage was delayed, won't be coming through today after all." Faith and Quinn exchanged glances. "That's not necessarily bad news, Sheriff," Faith said carefully. Sheriff Dawson's weathered face showed confusion. "Perhaps not, but the reason for the delay is troubling. The Coulter gang attacked another stage yesterday near Bozeman. 2 passengers killed." His gaze sharpened on Faith. One was a woman traveling alone, a milliner from back east headed to open a shop in Helena. Faith paled visibly. "What was her name?" "Harriet Winters, according to the manifest." "Not my aunt then," Faith said, relief evident in her voice. "But how terrible, those poor people." Sheriff Dawson nodded grimly. "We're gathering a posse. The Army's sending men from Fort Ellis as well. These attacks have gone on long enough." He turned to Quinn. "Could use a good shot like you, Quinn, especially since you've seen these men face to face." Quinn felt Faith's eyes on him, knew she was remembering his words about wanting a life beyond mere survival. This was a test of that nascent commitment. Would he ride with the posse as the solitary man he'd been, or choose a different path as the man he was becoming? "I appreciate the thought, Sheriff," Quinn said carefully, "but I have responsibilities here that can't wait." He glanced at Faith. "The storm damaged my corral and one of my Mustangs is still loose. Beyond that, Miss Valentin and I—" He hesitated, suddenly aware of the presumption in what he was about to say. Faith stepped forward, slipping her hand into his. "Mr. O'Malley has asked me to stay on at the ranch, Sheriff, permanently." Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face. "Well now," he said, a smile breaking through his grave expression, "that's unexpected but not surprising." "Congratulations to you both." He replaced his hat. "I'll tell the stage company to expect one less passenger when service resumes." His expression sobered. "Stay vigilant, though. Those outlaws are still out there, and they're growing bolder." After the sheriff departed, Quinn turned to Faith. "You're certain, even knowing the dangers?" "Life holds danger everywhere, Quinn," she replied. "I'd rather face it here with you than safely alone in Helena." Over the following weeks, Quinn and Faith fell into a rhythm of shared work and deepening connection. The escaped Mustang returned of its own accord 3 days after the storm, seemingly glad for the shelter of the rebuilt corral. Quinn completed the repairs to storm damage while Faith transformed the cabin's sparse interior with small touches: wildflowers in a jar, a quilt from her trunk spread across the bed, herbs hung to dry from the rafters. They were married by a circuit preacher who passed through Livingston in late August, a simple ceremony with Sheriff Dawson and the storekeeper's wife as witnesses. Faith wore a dress of deep blue that brought out the amber of her eyes, and Quinn found himself speechless when she appeared on the sheriff's arm to walk down the short aisle of the town's small church. "You look," he began, words failing him. Faith's smile held all the warmth of the summer sun. "So do you," she replied, understanding what he couldn't articulate. As autumn approached, bringing the first hints of frost to the valley, news arrived that the Coulter gang had been captured or killed to the last man. The stagecoach routes returned to normal, and with them came a letter from Faith's aunt in Helena, expressing both concern at her prolonged silence and delight at the news of her marriage. "She wants to visit in the spring," Faith told Quinn as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "To see for herself that I'm happy." "And are you?" Quinn asked. the question revealing a vulnerability he would have hidden from anyone else. "Happy with this life we're building." Faith took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Happier than I believed possible after Father died. I thought I was destined for a half-life, making do with whatever scraps of purpose I could find." She looked out over the land that was becoming as dear to her as it was to him. "Instead, I found a whole life. A partner who sees me clearly, work that matters." That work had expanded beyond the boundaries of their ranch. Word had spread of Faith's medical knowledge, and increasingly, neighbors sought her advice for everything from difficult births to broken bones. The old doctor in Livingston, far from resenting her informal practice, had begun to mentor her, sharing his medical texts and knowledge accumulated over 40 years of frontier medicine. "Someday," he told her, "this town will need someone to take my place. Might as well be someone with both the skill and the heart for it." As winter settled over Paradise Valley, bringing short days and long nights perfect for planning, Quinn and Faith spoke often of the future, expanding the herd in spring, adding a proper clinic room to the cabin, perhaps even children someday. Dreams that neither had dared entertain before finding each other. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and firelight casting golden shadows across the cabin walls, Quinn presented Faith with a gift, a doctor's bag crafted by the saddlemaker in Livingston, with her initials tooled into the leather. "For the doctor you already are," he said as she traced the letters with wondering fingers, "and the doctor you're becoming." Faith's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I'd find someone who would encourage this part of me rather than try to diminish it." "That's what love is," Quinn replied, the word coming easily now after months of learning its contours. "Seeing all that someone is, and wanting them to become even more." Faith set the bag aside carefully and moved into his arms. "I have a gift for you as well," she whispered against his chest, "one that won't arrive until summer." It took a moment for Quinn to understand her meaning. When he did, joy and terror mingled in equal measure as he tightened his embrace. "A baby, you're certain?" Faith nodded, her smile bright enough to outshine the Christmas candles. "Doctor Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We're to be parents, Quinn O'Malley." As the new year of 1874 dawned cold and clear over Paradise Valley, Quinn stood on the porch of the cabin that had become a home, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered mountains pink and gold. Behind him, Faith still slept, her breathing deep and peaceful. 6 years ago, he had ridden west with nothing but bitter memories and a determination to need no one. Now he had land that flourished under his care, a wife who matched him in strength and exceeded him in compassion, and a child on the way who would know only love, not the bitter silences of his own childhood. Quinn O'Malley had dared to dream of something beyond mere survival, beyond the solitary existence he'd thought was his only option. In Faith Valentin O'Malley he'd found not just beauty, but a heart as vast and giving as the Montana sky that stretched above them. A heart that had enough room for him, for medicine, for the community they were building together, and for the family they would become. As the golden light touched his face, Quinn whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought Faith's stagecoach across his path that summer day, changing the course of 2 lives that might otherwise never have intersected. When Faith joined him minutes later, wrapping a quilt around them both against the morning chill, Quinn pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her temple, right over the small scar that spoke of her courage even as a child. "What are you thinking about so intently?" she asked, nestling against him. Quinn smiled, his gaze taking in the land that stretched before them, their land now, their future. "That some dreams are worth the risk of dreaming them," he said. Even for a stubborn cowboy who thought he knew better. Faith's laughter, bright and clear in the winter air, was all the answer he needed.